Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sandy K Nutrition, Health and Lifestyle Queen. Today, my podcast is all about embodiment. And you might be like, God, I haven't heard that word in a long time. It's probably because most of us do not ever even touch that feeling of embodiment. And this podcast is going to go through all of that because really, the end goal when we do all this work, we do all this work on our physical, on our internal, on our spiritual, is to live in an embodied state, something that while technology is pretty amazing, it also takes us farther and farther away from that embodied state, which you're going to hear more about in this podcast. But for the first time in a long time, I'm coming with a preamble. And the reason I am doing this preamble is this podcast is dedicated to my dad, who will be 89 years old this month. Him and my mom are my living examples of true longevity in front of my face all these years. And they both still live in their own home. Like nobody comes without a few little bumps and bruises along the way when you reach 80. And my mom's going to be 80 this year, and my dad 89 this month. However, they are truly people who are living in that state of awareness and internal compass that they never veer from. So if you don't want to hear my dad's story, that's okay. You can forward to the actual podcast, but I feel that in over 300 episodes, I have never once dedicated a podcast to anyone. My dad deserves it. He was born in 1937, and he was born to a very, very poor farmer who had already had three sons before him. And he grew up in Croatia. And this is, I think it was northern Croatia, about an hour away from Zagreb. And his mother died giving birth to him, which I think happened a lot more often than we even realize, because when you're born in a house and there's no doctors, no, you would have oh God, what is wrong with me? Why can't I think of that? Like one of these nurses. God, why can't I think of the word? Anyway, you know what I'm talking about. You would have somebody who would help during labor, but if something went wrong, and it can usually go very wrong. So imagine this boy born 1937, and no mother, three older brothers who are not that far apart. They weren't that far apart in age, and a very poor farming single father. And oh God, I hear some of these stories. My dad would, at 2 years of age, run to his aunt, who was basically like his wet nurse. He would nurse from her at age 2. He had no mother. Somehow, my grandfather, kept this little baby alive. I think it was through the help of my aunt. I guess it would be my great aunt, because it would be my grandfather's sister. So they somehow kept my dad alive. And then he ended up remarrying my grandfather and had five more children. So there were nine of them. And my dad tells me stories. So they moved from a place called Zagorje, and they moved to Slavonia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it properly. And imagine that. My grandfather moved all these children and the new wife. I don't know how old the children were or when the next five came along. They had no house to live in. They were living in a tent with young children until they could build a house in their new settled area. And I guess they built it from like mud. It's a long time ago, my friends. So my father tells stories about being really hungry as a child. And, we see poverty, we see a lot of it in this world, but this is a real extreme in the sense that, they would have basically almost not even a roof over their heads at times. And I remember my dad telling stories how, they'd have one pair of boots. And if it was bad weather and it was really cold, only one kid went to school that day. And sometimes my father would be so cold, he would go to the barn to sleep with the horses in the barn because the hay helped keep him warm. So, these stories are like heavy, heavy stories. And my father left home at 15. He went to Bosnia and he went to work at, I think it is like construction of some sort. He would be carrying these big cement blocks, 15 years old, in order to build buildings. And then he came to the realization that this wasn't going to be a life for him. This wasn't going to take him to where he wanted to go on this in this world. And I do believe that this type of resiliency comes with challenge, but then you have to take into account a lot of other factors. My dad speaks about how he was never told, I love you. He was never given a hug as a child. Like, I can get tears, like this is heavy stuff. And my dad is the most incredible human being. I'm going to continue the story. So he actually, at 18, I think he was about 18, he escaped 18 or just turned 19, escaped from Croatia. So he went back from Bosnia back to Croatia because the whole, construction working, whatever, wasn't really doing much for him. It wasn't helping him. It wasn't helping him get ahead in this life. Imagine 15 and thinking about these things. So he went back to Croatia and then he decided he was going to leave permanently and he had to escape. He literally ran on foot across the border to escape Croatia. And I think he went to Austria, I think. I can't really remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure he was there and he lived in it was like communal living for a while until it was his turn to get on a boat to come to Canada. He decided he had to write, where does he want to immigrate to? And he wanted to come to Canada. So he ended up coming on a boat. His boat docked in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Pier 21. He got off that boat, didn't know a word of English, 19 years old, didn't know what he was going to do, barely even had a suitcase. And some woman said, or no, he got on a train, I think to Edmonton is what he said. And then he was going there because he was going to go, some woman set him up to work for a farmer there in Edmonton. So my dad worked in mines in the Yukon. He worked extreme, like, obviously working in the mines, very dangerous work. He also worked in and lived in Calgary. He learned how to drive and he became a driving instructor. He did, I don't even know how many different jobs. And then the story goes, I guess he was with one of his other friends and he said, it's time for us to go back to Croatia. Let's go and find ourselves some wives. Okay, maybe I'm exaggerating the story, but that's when he went back to Croatia and his sister introduced him to my mother, who was a lot younger. He was 27, she was 18. And anyway, the story goes, they ended up getting married. They immigrated to Canada. He came first. He made sure that there was a place for them to live and settle. And somehow my dad's internal compass never, ever veered away from his wife, his children. That's myself and my sister. We had one sister who died when my parents just moved to Canada. My mom got pregnant. She had a baby, and that baby died after 2 weeks. It was some sort of like a hole in her heart, something like that. So imagine, like, my mother's gone through cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at age 52. She's now going to be 80. My dad had colon cancer. They had me, who had cancer, and then my daughter, their granddaughter, she was 5 when she had cancer. So it's not without heartache. And this is the human condition. But when you have this internal compass, this essence within you, where you really know who you are at your core. And the problem is, everything in today's modern world, it's all great, but it often pulls us away from that essence. And my father is a living example of someone who always found his way back to himself. And one of the things I talk about in this podcast is how, embodiment is almost like this feeling that we kind of dip in and out of. But if we're always kind of blocking that feeling, we're never going to get there. And so we do need to do the work. We do need to work a little bit harder because we have so many distractions. And so I'm going to continue now with my podcast, a lot of science and a lot of soul about embodiment, and wish my dad a happy 89th birthday. Thank you for always being here and listening. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sandy K Nutrition, Health and Lifestyle Queen. Oops, I better bring my mic a little closer. This week, I am going to talk to you all about embodiment, what it is, why we lose it, how we get it back. So, I'm going to first define what it is. It's really a feeling. And most of us in this modern life, in this modern way of living, have lost that feeling of embodiment. It's not that easy to get anymore. I'm going to explain why. I'm going to explain what you can do. I'm going to explain how you can get there. And as most of you know, everyone who listens to my podcast, I believe that you all have it within you to learn more about how your body works. I'm not giving you any advice here. I do rely on some research, but then it's your job to take what I say and go, that resonates or that doesn't, because I believe that every human being is really intelligent when they tap into what feels right for them. And what's happened in this space of health and wellness, body, mind, spirit, soul, it feels almost as though, you know, information is coming at you like you don't have the intelligence to decipher what makes sense because they're saying, the research says this. So if you say opposite, you must be wrong. And we have seen very clearly that often research is wrong. And research, while it may be right for one person, it's not right for another person because our physiology and our internal landscape is so different and unique. And that's why I believe that everybody has that innate intelligence if they tap into it. A lot of the topics that I cover can be pretty heavy. And a lot of us want to skip to the good part. You know that song, Let's Skip to the Good Part. And the fact of the matter is, it's not easy to do. And you can't really just skip to the good part without doing the work. So I pretty intuitively just had a lot of topics lately where it talks about doing the work. And now I'm not skipping to the good part, I'm getting to the good part, which is that feeling of embodiment. It's when you do all the work and you're like, when does the work end? And it never ends. So I will say that it never ends. We never ever reach that peak and that summit and go, okay, our humanity is done now. We don't have to do any more work. Because the fact is, the human condition is really complex. And a lot of times, most of us sit there and go, why'd this happen to me? I don't get it. But we don't pause long enough or work hard enough on why things happen. I've had so many conversations, mostly with people who follow me on Instagram. By the way, I have been in this space for many, many years, 9 years on Instagram. My podcast hit six in February, over 1.4 million downloads of my podcast. Please hit subscribe wherever it is that you are listening to this or watching this, because it just helps me to keep going. And it's almost like that feedback without giving me feedback. Because often I feel like it's a one-sided conversation. And most of you know, I come every week with passion over profit, without heavy sponsorships and biases, because I want to give you truth. But again, this is my truth. It doesn't necessarily mean it's your truth. So that's why I come every week with a bunch of different options, and really, it's more or less just topics to help you think about things in a different light from an unbiased perspective. So if you could follow me wherever you are listening, go to Instagram. I'm most active there. Sandy K Nutrition everywhere. Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Threads, Lemonade, YouTube. You're probably watching this on YouTube. Just hit subscribe. Also, wherever you are listening to my podcast, if it is on Apple or Spotify, if you can provide me with some kind words and a rating and a review, it really helps my podcast to just keep getting found by more and more people. So I appreciate you listening to that. Now, I have had many conversations with people privately on DM, on Instagram mostly, just about how hard 2025 has been for many and many of you out there. And I'm not sure if it's just me or if it's everybody, but I feel like life, and when I say hard, it's more, it's like the rhythms of life. You know, you go through life and you're like, things are great. I remember 2018, 2019, they were fabulous years. And then the pandemic hit, and I almost feel like people have lost their footing since then. 2025 was a tough year for many of you. 2026, they say, is the year of disclosure. I don't get into politics, I don't get into all of that here, but many of you have seen this on a macro level, on a worldwide level, and then also in your own lives where things and structures that worked before no longer work. So, the reason I'm recording this podcast is to give you hope that there is hope and there is that light at the end of the tunnel, but you have to keep working to keep that light on, because feelings that are really good, like embodiment, are not they're not permanent, meaning you dip in and out of embodiment. And I'm going to get into that. So really, it starts off, it's this feeling of being able to feel yourself from the inside out. And this goes with everything, my friends: beauty, health, your aura, everything goes from the inside out. So it starts internally with you. And embodiment is not fake. You know how sometimes, listen, I go back to times where you drink and get drunk and have a great time and you feel like you're embodied, but you're not. You're actually not. It's a false sense of embodiment. Embodiment is when you are really in that sound mind, body. You feel your body. You feel this feeling from deep within you. And it's a neurophysiological state. So it's this internal awareness. And and it's not aesthetics. You know how you see a lot of these aesthetics online? That's not what this is about. It's when, you know how that saying, dance like nobody's watching? That's an example of embodiment. Nobody's watching you. You're not performing for anybody. It's inside of you, and it's almost like this private feeling that comes from within you. But many of us have lost that feeling, especially around midlife, menopause, when you have a lot of I'm going to say rockiness in, your hormones and maybe health challenges and maybe stress challenges, which I'm going to get into. So I'm going to talk about the insula. It's in the brain. That's your internal awareness, the vagus nerve regulation. You hear a lot about these vagus nerve stimulators. Just remember, my friends, every little thing like meditation, vagus nerve stimulations, walks in nature, these are all pieces of the puzzle. It resolves one issue, okay, and relieves one tension that may be a factor in why you're not feeling embodied. So it's really all about the holistic body, whole, WHOLE, whole. I'm also going to talk about interoception, which is an internal sensing, kind of like intuition. And then there's proprioception, and that is body in space awareness, parasympathetic access, which is your safety. I talk a lot about sympathetic versus parasympathetic nervous system. Remember, sympathetic, the best way to know the difference, sympathetic, think of it as if you were sympathizing with absolutely everything and everyone all around you, you'd be a stressed out mess. You do not want to be in that parasympathetic nervous system state all the time. You want, did I say that backwards? In that sympathetic nervous state all the time. You want to be in the parasympathetic nervous state, and you can dip in that sympathetic nervous state when you need to, not living there. Okay. Then there's emotional literacy. That's just feeling life without overwhelm. Often we feel overwhelmed. And the fact of the matter is, most people today don't feel embodied, not because they're shallow, but because modern life makes embodiment biologically difficult to feel. It's the way we live, my friends. So, this episode is going to talk about what embodiment is, the science behind it, why humans used to be more embodied, why we lost it, how we can get it back, why we dip in and out of embodiment, and what actions actually can rebuild embodiment within us, what work actually touches. And I'm going to talk about a little example, and maybe I'm going to talk about it right now. One day I don't know, I was driving and then I stopped at a store, and this man had this, I don't know, 1985 Camaro, 1980, I don't know what year. He had the music blaring, totally like probably like White Snake or something from the 80s, like hair rock. He steps out. He is literally wearing like a 1980 outfit. Okay. His hair, his body, his clothing, whatever. He was sober. He was driving. He didn't look like he was impaired in any way, shape, or form, but he was feeling himself. And I stopped and just watched him almost in amazement because I'm like, wow, that guy's really feeling himself. He didn't care what anybody was thinking about his car, his hair, his clothes, what he might have looked like, the song he was playing. He was in his light and he was feeling himself. This is an example of embodiment. And remember, this comes from nothing else outside of you, nothing making you feel that way except you from the inside out. I wanted to give you that example because it was just like it was really nice to see. Okay, so let's go into a little bit of the science. I always like to dip into that. So, the insula is the brain's internal dashboard. Okay, it tells you what's happening inside of your body in real time. So, it gives you that emotional awareness, intuition, body mapping, self-awareness, integrating body signals into decisions. And it's only active when you are grounded, clear, and present. When it is suppressed, it is numbed, disconnected, and it's reactive. Okay. So, interoception, I mentioned that at the beginning, it's feeling yourself from the inside. So, these are feelings like hunger, fullness, emotion, intuition, tension, truth. It is governed by the insula. So, high interoception is embodiment, and low interoception is that numbness. So, proprioception, just bear with me as I get through this because I'm going to tie it all together. You're going to love it in a nice, neat little bow. So, it's knowing where your body is in space. It's like an internal GPS, and it's strengthened by movement. Guess what? It's destroyed by, my friends. It's destroyed by sitting too much. I know, right? So then there's the vagal tone, your body's ability to regulate itself. So high vagal tone. So this is what I was mentioning at the beginning. It it's emotional stability and groundedness. All of these things keep you in your body. Okay. Low vagal tone is reactivity and overwhelm. And then the parasympathetic axis, which I talked about, your ability to shift out of survival mode. Embodiment requires parasympathetic dominance. That means if you're in that sympathetic state, you can't possibly feel embodied. You can't be in your body. And then that fight flight shuts down the insula, that part in your brain. Okay. So, emotional literacy, it's the last piece. It's feeling without being hijacked. So, staying with the sensation, a lot of people have a hard time with this instead of escaping it. I've recorded podcasts about this, about why so many people drink at midlife. They are trying to escape that emotional toughness that sometimes we go through. And that will only block that embodiment even more. So I'm going to give you some, talks about the 80s and the 90s and why we used to be more embodied. And I have been watching, it's done now, and I'm so sad because it's done. There ain't going to be a season 2 in the in the series Love Story. Unfortunately, the JFK story with Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. And everybody's been watching that. And, that's a real life depiction, okay, sort of real life, of how Carolyn Kennedy had a really hard time dealing in the public eye. And I'm sure it was a really big deal for her because nobody lived this way during that time unless you were a celebrity, which I've touched on. So, we used to be more embodied in the 80s and 90s because we weren't being filmed. There were no cameras, no phones, no performance, no identity curation. We weren't curating our Instagram feed so that it looks a certain way. And the result was you were in your body and not so much in your head. I have poetry books that I've written. Most of you know I am an English literature graduate. I've written a lot of poetry, a lot of diary writing, and sometimes it's kind of cool to go back to that and read how it was in those times. And even the mindset, like I really felt things, but I've always been that person. So an example was, dancing at a club in 1988. You were sweating, you were laughing, you were moving. You didn't care. You weren't worried. You weren't worried how you were going to appear to somebody else or if somebody else was filming you. So back in the 80s and 90s, there was also more movement. We walked everywhere. We danced for hours. I don't know. Do young people dance a lot now? I don't know. We went to clubs. And when we were really little, all we did was play outside. So movement, that equates to proprioception, which equates to embodiment. So there was a lot less dopamine hijacking as well. No notifications, endless scrolling, no algorithm. Your presence was very natural. And then there was more real life connection, eye contact. This drives me crazy. I'm sure a lot of you who are Gen Xers who watch this or listen to this, it drives you crazy when your 20-year-old is answering you and looking at their phone. It's not even your 20-year-old. Sometimes it's your spouse. It's like, look me in the eyes while you're talking to me. I was taught that even when I was a little kid. So, connection, eye contact means that connection, the physical proximity, social nervous system activation. And then there is the fact that there is way less comparison. You compared yourself to maybe the 20 people that you surrounded yourself with versus 20 million on social media. That's tough to compare yourself to that, right? So now let's get into why, more the whys, why modern humans can't feel embodied now. The chronic sympathetic dominance, constant low grade fight flight. We're constantly in that. I recorded a podcast about nutrition and weight loss and really how we're not even doing the basics, but we're getting into all the biohacks. It's like, okay, you're so worried about digestion and nutrition and, gas and gut issues. How about you just stop eating in front of a screen? Start there. No phones, no laptops, no working while you're eating. So, this chronic sympathetic dominance, high cortisol suppresses the insula, that part in your brain. So, insula suppression is stress plus multitasking equals shutdown of that embodiment center. And then there's that dopamine hijacking I mentioned. Social media pulls attention outward, embodiment requires inward attention. Sensory overload, too much noise, the brain gates out internal signals. When there's so much noise around you, like, I don't know about you guys, but I even watch, you know, my kids and students now, they study with headphones in their ears and music blaring, or and then the TV's also on. Like, I don't get it. Like, to me, that's sensory overload. Then there's the sedentary lifestyle. Sitting down destroys proprioception, fragmented attention, multitasking fragments self awareness, emotional bypassing, avoidance increases sympathetic tone, metabolic dysregulation, blood sugar swings, emotional chaos, inflammation, reduced interoception, trauma physiology as a baseline, freeze, fawn, fight, flight, they become the default. So I'm just kind of naming all that for you. I think you guys get the point. But with all of that noise and interruption of your own circuitry, how are you ever going to feel embodied, true to yourself? It's virtually impossible. So, embodiment is not the ego, okay? And I want to make that clear. Sometimes you see somebody who looks like they're embodied. They're driving their brand new Porsche, a $300,000 car. They got their expensive shades on. They got their, Louis Vuitton bag, and they step out decked out in designer. That is an embodiment, my friends. That's ego. Because when you're embodied, you don't need any of that. Just like my Camaro man that I mentioned. You don't need that. And you also don't need that for people to notice your light and to feel that embodiment from you. So, ego driven living. I want to define this. There's that external validation where your worth depends on other people's reactions, identity curation, constructing a persona instead of inhabiting self. On social media, it's pretty tough. You're not going to go and air all your dirty laundry on social media. However, people will often curate a version of themselves that they want everyone else to see. And then you see it and you're like, damn, I'm not like that. And it ends up making you feel worse because you're comparing yourself to a persona, not true embodiment. And if you're embodied, you're not comparing yourself to anybody, right? So then there's performance, behaving to influence perception. That's social media, right? Status based confidence, confidence tied to external markers. My confidence is tied to the clothes I wear, to the house I live in, to the car I drive, to the bag I carry. So, something to think about. And I think the world is changing, by the way. I was very different in my 40s, just saying, where stuff like that really mattered to me a lot more than it does today. Dopamine driven self worth, chasing hits, novelty, and praise. Then there's that hypervigilance, scanning for threat or judgment. Then there's the sympathetic activation. Nervous system is stuck in that survival mode. Now, I'm going to give you an example specifically of embodied living, what that means for all of those things that I talked about. So, interoception is feeling internal cues very clearly. This is your intuition, my friends. If your intuition is blocked, so is that interoception that I talked about. The vagal tone, regulated, grounded, and emotionally stable. Nervous system safety. The body perceives the environment as safe. Like my Camaro man, he didn't care what was around him. He was feeling himself. He felt good and safe in his body. Internal clarity, decisions guided by internal cues. Again, it's kind of repetitive. Presence, attention is anchored in the moment. Everyone talks about being more present. That's a part of being embodied, is being anchored in the moment. Self-respect, boundaries rooted in internal truth. Oh, God. I could talk about boundaries in and of itself because I think people get a false sense of what boundaries mean, but really those boundaries come from the inside of you and you feel them. And often we we ignore them. That's the truth. We ignore them. And then we end up not feeling so great when we ignore our internal boundaries. So it's not from the outside in, it's from the inside out. That's how you determine boundaries. Not he got mad at me and he told me I need to do this and this and this. I'm going to put boundaries around him. He's not allowed to talk to me like that. No, it comes from inside of you. I'm feeling a certain way. And you have to do the work in order to have those very clear boundaries. You can't just cut everybody off, which sometimes social media gives you that perception. Like if anybody says anything to you, you got to cut them off and strengthen those boundaries. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. So, oh God, where was I? Yeah. Parasympathetic access, rest and digest, embodiment becomes possible. If you're constantly go, 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 you're never going to be able to feel embodied if you're never quiet in your life. I want to just explain embodiment is not a state that you can live in all the time. And often we dip in and out of that feeling of embodiment. And my big thing is doing the work to clear anything that may cloud that feeling from inside of me so that I can feel it more. So it is more of a capacity versus a permanent state. And when you're under stress, when you allow all of those triggers to bother you, then you're going to dip out of embodiment and you dip back in when you feel safe. So the goal is not to stay embodied, the goal is just to return to embodiment because the facts are like we can't change life around us. We can't control all the uncontrollables around us. So, this is why I'm going to talk about some ways that you can, okay, you're going to dip out, you're going to dip back in a little easier. So, one is movement. You're going to restore the proprioception, that feeling. You're going to regulate your vagus nerve and you rebuild the body map when you move. So even if you have a sit down job, go outside for a walk as often as you can. And it's more about those micro movements versus going out and walking for 45 minutes of your lunch. No, you want to get up and move, go outside, get some fresh air, take a few deep breaths. I'll get to that too. Breath work. So, when you do some sort of breath work, there's so many different ways. When my kids were little, this is a long time ago, my friends, because they're now in their 20s. But when they were little, I taught them, they played a lot of sports that were competitive. So I taught them 4-7-8. And it's a very basic breath work. And it was Dr. Andrew Weil who coined this 4-7-8. In for 4 seconds, hold for 7 seconds, out for 8. In through the nose, out through the mouth. There you go. That's your breath work. Do that as often as you can to make sure that you're not breathing from, your chest only. You want to reduce the sensory input. So, less noise, less multitasking, less stimulation. So that's on you to decide what is your tolerance level. Then of course, blood sugar stability, it prevents that emotional reactivity. It always goes down to health. Like what are you putting in your body? What are you doing to ensure that your blood sugar is stable? This becomes more and more of an issue as you age. Emotional tolerance, feeling instead of bypassing. If you're that person who comes home from a hard day at work and has to have alcohol in order to regulate, well, that's a form of bypassing. It is. And I'm not judging you for drinking. I'm just telling you fact. If, for me, I'll give you an example. If I have a hard day, I get outside, I go for a walk, I clear my head. I don't have my headphones on. I don't put music on. I don't do anything, although music can sometimes be helpful. But that's how I clear my head. And it is through feeling. Reduce the self monitoring, less adjusting, less performing. You know, um, a lot of people do this in my industry, they perform. And sometimes I do too. I mean, when you're in social media, it's kind of hard not to. But I think if you take that out of your work life and put it that rule into your personal, you're going to be a lot happier. Get out in nature. I mean, I recorded one of my first podcasts ever about how nature heals. That regulates the nervous system in and of itself. This morning I sat there. I I this is my office where I record, but then I also work at my kitchen table where I look straight outside in the trees and I watch birds. I take a break. It's great for your nervous system to do that. Somatic awareness, body scans, grounding, hand on chest. If you're having a hard day, put both feet on the ground and feel what your body's feeling and where the tension is. and then let it go. I've been a massive fan of Qigong. I've been doing this now since January, and I try and do it every morning, and I love it because it starts my day off right to ensure I'm not carrying any tension or stress through my day. At least I'm starting my day off on a clean slate. Nervous system repair, sleep, minerals, hydration, reducing stimulants. I mean, these are basics. So some of the work that I have been doing goes a lot deeper. And not everybody's called to do that. And sometimes you may not be called to do that today, but you might want to do it tomorrow. I just happen to be a big fan of really doing the work. So Brenda Ferrugia of sobrilliant.ca, I actually have no affiliation with her. I don't get paid anything. I don't, but she has changed my life in a way that is measurable by me, which is all that matters. And she teaches so many different ways in which you can kind of regulate all of this and feel more embodied because the goal is you want to feel better. A lot of times, the work makes you feel awful. It's true. But this is the human condition to get through the hard, feel embodied, dip in and out. Then, unfortunately, some of the harder stuff might come back. This is life, my friends. We just need to learn how to cope better. And Brenda is one of those people that helps with that. So you start with nervous system safety. So her work emphasizes safety first, slowness, micro doses of sensation, building capacity, not forcing things. I've actually done shows about microdosing, and I have heard some pretty, eye-opening stories about microdosing. Sometimes people feel like that's their route to healing, and sometimes because it's almost forced upon you by the plant medicines, you feel dysregulated for a very long time. And you might feel dysregulated when you do the work as well, but not in such an extreme because when you do the work with Brenda, the only person that's in charge is your higher self, nobody else. Not Brenda, not the plant medicine, because there isn't any, nothing else. Your higher self is in charge. And that's what I love because not many people teach you this. A lot of people want to teach you to be dependent on them for your betterment, body, mind, spirit, soul. You see that a lot. And there are very few people out there who teach and give you the tools so that you can be on your way and you're no longer dependent on them for anything. Your higher self is always going to be in charge once you learn that. So, Brenda's approach also builds tolerance for sensation. It helps to reduce the emotional overfunctioning. It helps you to reconnect with the insula, that part in your brain, through micro awareness, noticing your breath, noticing your feet, noticing your jaw, the tightness in your jaw. She does a lot of cool meditations too. And beam therapy, nobody I know does beam therapy sessions. This is unique to Brenda, and very few people in the world do this. Beam therapy was developed by a medical doctor. She also encourages to repair the relationship with your body, repattern your stress responses, which is often a result of a lot of built up trauma and a lot of negative beliefs. She helps you to clear that, build capacity, not intensity, integrate movement as medicine, and create an environment that supports embodiment. So, I think I've given you a lot. I'm going to close off now because now it's up to you to take this and see what makes sense for you. How do you feel like the Camaro man? who I loved. This guy was the coolest. How do you get to that point? But it's your feeling, not his. I'm just using him as an example. So physically, embodiment feels like your breath drops, your shoulders soften, your jaw releases, there's a warmth in your chest, and you feel grounded. Emotionally, there is a clarity, a steadiness, and a truth that comes from inside of you. You no longer over explain, argue. You just feel it and it feels so right. And energetically, there's coherence and there's presence and there's internal safety. So I mean, it's hard, but things could be falling apart around you, but you still come back to yourself and feel all of that. So embodiment is rare because modern life makes it difficult. But this is your choice to make it what you want and to get there how you want. It's available on the other side of some of the work that I mentioned. And the work's not that hard. It becomes second nature if it resonates with you. So it's not about the ego. It's not about aesthetics. It's not about performance. It's the feeling of being in your own life and not watching it from the outside. So if this podcast inspired you in any way, please share it with a friend. I greatly appreciate all of you for coming back each and every week. Feel free to send me an email with any comments. If you have ideas for shows, I am at sandy@sandyknutrition.ca. And I thank you so much, and we will see you next week. Have a great week.